Welcome to the Unscripted Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we are going to be hearing from a veteran on how her military experience has shaped her leadership and what companies should consider when recruiting military talent. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Hallie Johnston, who is the U.S. Director of Equipment at Henry Schein. Hallie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me.
We were just having a chat about, the constant juggling that working mothers do, especially the Friday before Mother's Day. It's like all of the things. Appreciate that. But before we get into the meat of our conversation, can you just tell everyone a little bit more, whatever you would like to share about yourself, your role, and what Henry Schein does?
Absolutely. So, again, Hallie Johnston, grew up in the great state of Alaska and went to attend the United States Military Academy at West Point here in New York. From there, lived in a ton of different places, served in the Army as a helicopter pilot. And when I first transitioned out, I actually went into the financial industry. Had a great experience with JP Morgan. Can't say enough phenomenal things about them. um, Startup, and then I actually found my home with Henry Schein back in 2021, not at the start of COVID, but right in the middle. So very remote remote atmosphere. But here on Long Island and phenomenal organization. When I started, I actually was overseeing the service and field operations for the eastern half of the United States. Um, the last couple of years, I've taken over full operations for our equipment business and oversee the full U.S. dental operations.
Wonderful. So moving from the world of finance into the world of field service is quite a transition. But like you said, you found your home, so it must mean that you really love it.
I do. It's a wonderful organization. Like you said, the financial world and the healthcare world are vastly different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're going to get into it in a little bit. The role that I went into, what Henry Schein was looking for from a leadership aspect, was a little different than what they currently had. But I think it was more, and I say this to anyone, um, if you have the soft skills, you can learn any product, you can learn any
Mm-hmm.
service. So that was the mindset or the opportunity they gave me and the risk, I guess they took on me. And it's been wonderful, wonderful leadership. The culture's phenomenal. And, if you've ever heard Stan speak, it's all about giving back to the community. So
Mm-hmm.
that's paramount
A
in
real sense of
and what I look for.
purpose.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, so let's rewind back just a little bit. So like you said, you attended West Point, spent more than 5 years as an aviation officer and combat helicopter pilot in the Army, which is just wild for me to imagine. It sounds terrifying, quite frankly. I'm afraid of heights, though, so that probably has a bit of influence on that opinion. So when you think about that experience and then, how you transitioned into life after that and where you've come to today, how would you summarize the influence that your service has had on your leadership style and approach?
Yes. So I grew up in a military family.
Hmm.
Both my parents, my dad, my mom was actually a helicopter pilot herself. She
That's
flew the
awesome.
Huey. So that was in my upbringing.
Hmm.
Serving my country was almost kind of like what it's like a family affair. But I would say, going to West Point, they are for 4 years, they're developing you as a leader
Hmm.
and what are the different aspects in motivating. So when you think about leading any sort of team, it's how do you motivate? Can you communicate effectively? It's all around the intent to make them better to
Hmm.
accomplish the mission. So for me, it's more of I guess if you could ask anyone that team that I'm a part of, it's what do we need to do to make them better, make them grow? How do you again motivate them to accomplish the mission and have fun doing it?
Hmm.
So um, another big mantra that you hear in the military that I don't see as much as I would love to see in corporate America is the lead from the front, right?
Hmm.
So actions speak louder than words.
Hmm.
And when your team sees you having the ability or willing to do exactly what they're doing, I say get in the trenches,
Hmm.
um, then you you gain a lot of credit that way as well. And I would love to see a lot more of that in leaders across corporate America.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting. I was having a conversation earlier this week in Stockholm. So we had like a afternoon of roundtable discussions, and we were talking about all sorts of different things. But inevitably, in the conversations, when you think about how the world of service is evolving and all of the ways that it is. So the ways that technology is changing how service is delivered and how that then changes often the value proposition. And also it changes what you're expecting of your frontline workers and what those roles look like and
Mhm.
what skills then are required, et cetera. There's so many ways that the importance of leadership is embedded into all of that. Like it is so woven into how you either succeed or fail, right? Because this idea of how do you get people to rally around whatever the goal is, whatever you're working toward, and how do you make them feel bought into that mission, and how do you enable them and empower them to do what they need to do to collectively win, right? And it's interesting because I think where I see organizations struggle, it's usually because I always say this old school leadership mentality. That's not great terminology. I'm sure there's more specific terms for a leadership style, but where, you know, it's of an era where leaders were made to be um, meant to feel that they had to be the smartest person in the room, right? So it had to be that you knew it all and you were giving the instructions and the team
Yeah.
was carrying those out, right? And it's very different than what you're talking about, which is how do I equip my team for success? Like, how do I help them win? Right? It's not about how do I make myself look good? How do I make sure that I uphold my reputation or my ego that I'm the smartest person here? It's like the exact opposite of that. And I think in today's landscape, it's the only way to be successful because we don't live in a world anymore where any one person can know it all or have all of the skills, right? Like we need such a diverse set of skills and capabilities whatever the team is doing to win. No one person can have all of that. So you really have to shift to this mentality of how do I compile this team of great talent and then how do I help them succeed instead of like I'm in charge and I have all the answers. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. And a lot of the great successful leaders that you see today, they're not the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
What they were smart at is getting all those subject matter experts in the room with them. And I think a humility goes a long way,
Hmm.
right? The courageous curiosity, right? Being okay to raise your hand and say, I don't know. Um, that's been at least the team that I'm with right now, pushing that home of don't leave a meeting if you don't understand. If it
Hmm.
didn't click, I'd rather you ask now than later. You're just gonna, it'll just make your life harder. Um, that's a, yeah, I mean, humility goes a long way.
Yeah.
Being okay to say, yeah, I don't totally understand that. Can you help me out? Or being okay going to your peers or going to someone else and asking, well, what are your thoughts on this? How do you
Hmm.
think we should approach this? Um, in the military, they really, really train you to, it's risk mitigation, right? You're outweighing the pros and the cons and making the responsibilities on you, but the ability to make that decision and make it quickly
Hmm.
is a big piece of it as well.
Yeah. I like your point about humility. Like, there's no room for ego in leadership today, in my opinion, and you can see instances where it still exists, right? And it gets in the way of helping people come together and be successful. And to your point, I think what you were just saying made me think of a couple things. One is, when you are that person in a meeting that has a question and you're thinking like, I I don't want to ask because maybe I should know the answer.
Yeah.
But then you do ask, and probably four other people in the room had the same question and were like also debating in their minds whether they should ask or not, right? So like
Yes.
it helps more than just yourself. But then the way that as a leader, when you can admit that you don't know the solution to a problem, or you ask for input because you genuinely value the team's perspective, right? That
Hmm.
builds trust and it builds that relationship in a way that makes, your team feel so much more invested in what you're doing. It really is uh a powerful skill. It's not something that is, I think some of those old school leaders like perceive that as a weakness if you don't know everything or you have to ask for help or clarification or input, and it's just it's why I say old school. It's such an outdated viewpoint. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Even there's a lot to be said about your team feeling like they're heard as well,
hmm
right? If they have those suggestions and you actually look into it, or the team, or you recognize it, you listened and you make an adjustment, you make a change. Nothing is set in concrete. So,
yeah. Yeah. So when we were chatting about this podcast, we talked about all of these areas of balance in leadership. So you're balancing empathy and influence, support and accountability, empowering people but holding them accountable. And I think, it can be easy for any individual to incline more to one or the other. But really, you have to find, this balance. What have you found works best in striking the right balance in some of these things? Like, is there specific practices, tactics, tips, you can share for people on how you figure out what range on a continuum you need to leverage at any given moment.
so again, another skill taken, or another tactic taken from the military. They call it initial counseling. So any new position that you go into, and it's all around expectation setting. Um, See how the team operates for the first 30, 60, 90 days, and then set up one-on-ones with every single person on your team and lay out what your expectations are of them in that role, as well as what your goals are for them in that role in personal growth, but as well as, hitting specific goals for the organization.
Hmm.
And then give them an opportunity to articulate to you what their expectations of you as a leader are. What do
Hmm.
they need from you? Um, and if you set that standard up front, I mean, it just provides clarity for everyone, from everyone all around. That's a big one, right?
Hmm.
They have an opportunity to ask questions. You have an opportunity to always point back to that, right? Because
Hmm.
it's a specific one pager that you're reviewing and you're discussing. Um, and then again, I go back to, if your team understands and they genuinely know that it's a balance, like you said, of hitting organizational goals, but helping them grow.
Hmm.
And you might be pushing them past might be challenging them quite a bit. But that's all about letting them see that they're capable of
Hmm.
getting that done when they didn't believe in themselves. Um, so the expectations guide, yes, I'm the rah rah, but but I would also say professional candor, right? People want to
Hmm.
know like, how did I do? And celebrate the wins, but also when there's an opportunity to adjust or fix or have a quick learning lesson. We call them after action reviews. Uh, those go a long way, right? It's in the moment.
Hmm.
It's let's reflect on what just happened, what went really well, and what can we do better. And it's just continual learning lesson. It's continual learning lessons, and it's not just at the end of the year, right? When you have your annual performance review, it's consistent, it's continual, and everyone knows where they sit.
Yeah. I think that's important because, ambiguity is just something that, like, as human beings is uncomfortable, right? So if you're in a
Mhm.
role and you don't know, what is the expectation, but also, like, how am I contributing? How is what I'm showing up and doing every day making a difference in this team, in the company, in the world, right?
Yeah.
Then, having that sense of purpose, like you mentioned, that you have in your role at Henry Schein is important for so many people. And I think that, being able to see that clearly and, to your point, I would imagine also if someone, sees that laid out and says, well, wait a minute, like, I don't agree with this part, right? It's better to have those conversations up front than it is to be unclear and not know, the perspective people are coming from. You mentioned earlier having fun, or you just said like celebrating wins. How do you bring that into your team environment? Like the idea of, recognition, appreciation, reward, and then the idea of having fun. Like, if there's anything specific you do to sort of build that team camaraderie, anything to share in those two areas.
So for myself and my direct leaders, I push reaching out for feedback. Like how's this individual doing? Because um, everyone's busy, right? It's not the on the top of someone's mind if the day goes by and they didn't recognize somebody that just helped them out tremendously or was phenomenal in a customer's office or solving a solution. So proactively reaching out with specific questions on how did this go? How's this going? Um, and anytime that it's very, very positive, and 99% of the time it is, um, I like to celebrate those individuals with the entire team that they operate with so they can see what their team, it's not just
Mhm.
coming from their direct leadership chain, but also all the cross-functional partners that they work with that most seem to think everything goes unnoticed. But
Mhm.
I think if you're intentionally trying to reach out, get that feedback, and then make it known, we also do, quarterly, um, I say games or spiffs where you can recognize and people can aim for something outside of their day to day. And we make it fun, right? There's a
Mhm.
leadership board, top 10, top 20. It's continual, right? So everyone knows where everyone stands. Anything can change in any moment. It's fun. And it's a it's a great group, right? Everyone's super witty. So you have you can never be too serious in your day-to-day life. So
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, you have to enjoy that time if you're we spend so much time at work, right? It should be enjoyable. Another area we talked about in terms of skill is being able to have hard conversations. So, what is your advice on how to do that well?
so in the many different organizations that I've been in some teams where, you walk in and everyone just wanted to be everyone's best friend. That's hard, right?
Hmm.
If someone who maybe you've never set the expectation with has been doing the wrong thing, right? And no one's ever addressed that because it's difficult, right? We grow up and you make friends. You don't have to do that throughout your life. That so the first moment that you do, um, it's it's not natural. Uh, but I go back to that professional candor.
Hmm.
It's more appreciated by the recipient or by your team um, than I think people even realize.
Hmm.
So you don't need to be mean, right? It doesn't need to be aggressive, but when you when you approach having hard and tough conversations, it's it's more of speaking from the aspect or the perspective of this is just reality, right? Because we
Hmm.
did that expectations guide in the front or when we first started and I'm seeing a trend. It wasn't a one-off because everyone's human. You make those one-off mistakes. But if you see a trend, consistent trend, it's
Hmm.
something's going on. So, you know, most of the time you can approach it of, I know you are more than capable of doing this. What's going on? Maybe there's a background story. Maybe something's going on in their family. Um, and if that's the case of how can I help you during this time? But you're also letting them know like you are falling short of expectations.
Hmm.
And um, sometimes that's all people need to hear of like, oh, I need to get my act together. Um, but again, you mentioned um, earlier of it's important to know where you stand
Hmm.
and how you're performing, good or bad, so that they have an opportunity to adjust. Um, Again, in that same organization that I was at, I can't tell you how many times someone, worked throughout the year. At the end of the year, they got a below meets expectation, and they said, no one ever told me anything. I'm like,
Hmm.
wow. So, uh, at Henry Schein, and I'm sure many other organizations, we do a mid-year review. We even do it more often on my team because I
Hmm.
just think it's so important for teams to know how they're progressing, especially the ones that are very, very motivated and want to grow, want to learn. You want to make sure that they stay motivated.
Hmm.
And so there's the goals with work, but again, there's the goals with their professional growth. And as a leader, that's just as important as as it is meeting organizational goals.
Hmm.
I actually get more excited seeing someone get promoted or helping them network with different teams to grow and build additional skills even outside of that vertical. I think it's very strong. Um, and I think again when the team sees that,
Hmm.
it's they're actually they actually care.
Hmm.
And that's another motivator for team members.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think it's interesting to me how many people in the corporate world avoid hard conversations. Um,
It's mind blowing.
it is, it really, really is. And honestly, how much efficiency could be gained if this skill, it's not about just learning to be a jerk. That's not what I mean. It's not about like if everyone just had every hard conversation, things would be better. But the way that we avoid this is it causes a lot of inefficiency, right? Like it's if we could get better at, you know, like you said, the idea of that candor when it's needed and it would make a huge difference, I think, in how much things build or are avoided and then kind of fester. It's not healthy for a team, it's not healthy for an organization. It's just it is a very important skill to be able to just, like you said, address things honestly and without emotion or too much emotion, and just get to the bottom of it. I think it really helps people stay on the same page and work through things instead of letting them bubble up to bigger things.
Yeah, I would even say, especially now more than ever in a remote organization, because you're not with them
Hmm.
constantly day to day. And Yeah. Again, to your point, it doesn't have to be mean. Nothing ever needs to be mean. It's
Hmm.
not natural, right? You don't practice this skill as a child, even going through all the way through high school. I just had a unique opportunity through college, the military academy, that every position, even outside of academics, you were in a leadership position. So
Hmm.
I started to have those conversations as a freshman in college.
Hmm.
And it's just grown from there. So it becomes more comfortable, but it's more about you're doing it to help the other individual
Yeah.
so that they're aware and they can adjust and I can help them make those adjustments.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the idea of how we do a good job of bringing in and supporting military talent. So, you are an executive sponsor for Henry Schein's Veterans Employee Resource Group and involved in the company's efforts to hire military talent. So, this is an area where a lot of service organizations, know that bringing in military talent is a good opportunity. Um, what we spoke about when we were planning for this is that one of the big challenges is that people outside of the universe of service, field service, you know, aren't familiar with a lot of these B2B brands. There's sort of this whole ecosystem of companies that are keeping the world running that we interact with every day, but we don't know by name, right? And
Hmm.
so it's it can be a challenge to overcome when you're putting out, job postings or you're talking with candidates and they don't know what your company is or does or what opportunity that might present just based on the brand. So, do you have any thoughts, I guess, Henry Schein specific or just broader in terms of there's a lot of companies that fall into this category, how we soften that challenge?
So it's always been difficult. I think it's with a lot of organizations and the Veterans Jobs Coalition that started back in 2011. You now have a larger team um, working to fill that gap to help veterans transition, but also help organizations identify talent that they've never tapped into because
Hmm.
it's not the traditional path. There's a lot of organizations, just like what Henry Schein does, is they have pipelines to come in from college.
Hmm.
Well, every veteran has an alternative path, right? They're not doing that. They're not going directly from college to to corporate America. So a lot of organizations like Henry Schein have developed specific pipelines because they've experienced, right? It's one of those things that you've experienced, you had a good experience, and you're like, huh, how do I tap into that more?
Hmm.
And just like you said on the B2B, I'm a prime example. Um, I've never worked in the healthcare industry, and I go to doctor's appointments, I go to dentist appointments, and Henry Schein is all over, but it didn't click until I was living in Long Island and I drove past their uh, global headquarters constantly, and I just happened to be like, what is that? And then I learned all about them, but I could only imagine, you know, I'm going to speak from the Army's perspective. It's a bubble, right?
Hmm.
Consumer brands. That's the extent. And unless you heard it from a friend or an organization that comes in, they call it the TAPS program when service members are transitioning out. Um, Organizations come in and give a spiel or speech on what their organization does and how it might be a good fit for some service members with a specific skill set.
Hmm.
Um, so a lot of organizations have tapped into that, but that's not broadly known. There's also another program called SkillBridge that Henry Schein is now a partner of, so are a lot of organizations. If you think back to what GE kicked off years ago, um, it was that sense of a rotational program,
Hmm.
right? Because a role in the military to a role um, in outside or in the civilian world is not apples to apples. So
Hmm.
it gave an opportunity for someone to go, experience what they thought they would enjoy and how to apply their skill sets. It also gave them an opportunity to um, network within that organization, but test different roles before they, were hired directly into a role. And, you never want them to be like, this is awful. This is not
Hmm.
it's not what I thought it was. I interpreted this differently. Uh, so that's a great program. And I know I mentioned SkillBridge, which I think you're familiar with Skill. Are you familiar with SkillBridge?
I wasn't before we spoke, no. But I know you mentioned that a lot of organizations partner with SkillBridge to uh, hire from the military. And that was another question I had is like, are there any sort of best practices for companies that are going to work with SkillBridge that you can suggest?
Yes. So SkillBridge is a partnership with the DoD, and it's again, opportunity for service members that have basically made it known that they're going to transition out.
Hmm.
So I think it's different by branch and different by rank, but it's up to 6 months that they can go and do a quote unquote internship with an organization, fully paid for by the government, and it's really to help that transition. So one big gap that everyone is trying to solve for veterans is retention, right? Is
Hmm.
making sure they find the right fit with the right organization for that first role. You don't, the last thing you want is for a veteran to start a role and then within a year they're looking for something else because it wasn't the right fit. Um, so that's Skillbridge is phenomenal. We've had, Henry Schein's a Skillbridge partner. Um, we've had so much success in that.
Hmm.
And again, I go back to the very beginning when it's the soft skills, right?
Hmm.
So you can teach anyone if they want to learn, right? They have to put the work in a product or service. You don't necessarily have to have a career in something to be successful. I go back to the old way of thinking. I think there's a lot of people that are under that impression that
Hmm.
if you're not from this industry, you're going to have a really tough time. I'm like the polar opposite of that. I like to find the soft skills, the initiative, the drive, the discipline,
Hmm.
and the the individuals that Henry Schein has brought through with the Skillbridge program have again done tremendous, have such a phenomenal reputation within Henry Schein, and I just want to even expand it more.
Hmm. Yeah. Now, how, being that you made this transition yourself, and for people listening that want to take advantage of, to your point, this different path into the organization and bring people in that are transitioning out of their service in the military. What are some of the considerations of, you know, what companies should keep in mind or do to ease that transition, right? So like you said, it isn't the same as like leaving college and going in or having experience in the industry and then coming into this new role. There are things that make it different coming from having just completed your military service and you're entering into the corporate world. Um, are there pieces that are there things companies can do to help or have in mind to ease that transition for those individuals?
Yes, I still think there's a lot of work to do within organizations. Identifying and understanding the talent that a service member can bring, again, those soft skills
Hmm.
and how to leverage those, right? Because those skills, when you think of a team, can elevate others, and they can even help show others how to do that or what they've learned. But we've always, here we've been continually talking about like a manager playbook when it comes to veterans,
Mm-hmm.
so they understand what they might have gone through when they on their resume have this type of skill set. What does this mean? Or what does it mean to lead a battalion? Like
Mm-hmm.
what size of team is that? Um, there's just again, that's why I say the military is kind of like a bubble.
Yeah.
Um, you don't fully understand what that responsibility was. And so
Mm-hmm.
having other veterans in the organization kind of translate that and create
Mm-hmm.
that playbook for managers. I also say go back to the SkillBridge program. Um, it's a two-way street, right? So yes, bringing someone in, but you need to have someone who would like to have a SkillBridge candidate join their team. They just need to fully understand the commitment and the
Mm-hmm.
time that it's going to take to get them on board or onboarded, train them up and help them navigate. I think that's the most difficult part of any organization is being able to navigate that organization
Mm-hmm.
because it's very different than um, than the military. The
Mm-hmm.
how you navigate the two different organizations are vastly different. And then the last thing that I would say for a veteran coming in is they should always be paired up with another veteran mentor,
Mm-hmm.
to have like that safe space to ask questions of, all right, this is what I did. What is this? What does this mean? And um, here's another prime example in the military. You say yes, ma'am, no, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was when I first transitioned out, and that was probably one of the first. That was like the first advice that I got from a senior leader in a different organization. Is you? They're like, Hallie, you will lose a lot of respect. You just will if you walk into a room and you tell an older gentleman um or a woman, yes, ma'am. They're going to
Mm-hmm.
think if they will just you will lose respect immediately if you don't call them by their first name. And I said,
Well,
okay, that
that's
is so
actually
not natural.
a really good example, though, of how something that in the bubble is just a show of respect and a necessity, right? But
Hmm.
outside the bubble, it could actually be perceived as the complete opposite. Do you know
Hmm.
what I
It
mean?
yeah.
Because if you're not wearing a name tag that says I'm Hallie, I just left the army, right? Then people are like, why is she saying that? Like it,
Yeah.
it could almost be, I don't know, I could see where it could be perceived as condescending or all sorts of other things if you don't have that context, right? So like though that's a really good specific example of something where to you, you're just continuing on with what was expected of you in that role. And then someone's like, wait a minute, don't do that anymore because, here's how it could be perceived, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. So anyone that comes in, it, we will have a call, and I'm like, hey, don't forget this.
Yeah. By the way,
By the way.
yeah, that's a really good point though. And I think that there's probably all sorts of little things like that are just these differences that it's helpful to pass on. I was actually thinking too, the idea of matching people up with a mentor is a good point. But even the ERG, having a veterans ERG, giving people an opportunity to come together and network and share some of their experiences. And, that can be another great way for those individuals to connect and have community, but also for people that are not familiar with that world to learn from that group of, what those experiences are and what some of the challenges are, and just have better awareness of, what that transition can be like for people that haven't experienced it.
Absolutely. I would even say our Veterans ERG, which is one of the largest within Henry Schein, it's made up more of non-service
Yeah.
members than than there are. But, you know, They want to support maybe their family serve. They just have so much
Hmm.
appreciation. And to your point, we've had so many just broader ERG member calls, and they just want to learn.
Yeah.
They ask the questions, what does this mean? Or if so and so comes in, like, how do I support them here? It's a tremendous group.
Hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned this towards the beginning, the power of curiosity, right? I mean, just coming together and sharing those experiences, challenges, you know, it it would be valuable if it were just military individuals to have that opportunity to connect with one another, but it's even more powerful if others are joining in
Yeah.
to understand that journey better. Very good. Okay, so is there a story or uh story or two from your time in the army that you would be comfortable sharing with us? I'm just really interested in your experiences and would love to hear anything you want to tell us about.
I will tell you the scariest moment that I had. Again, they train you to be, especially as a pilot, like cool, calm, and collected,
Hmm.
because you typically have people in the helicopter with you and you are responsible for getting them from point A to point B safely. But I was in Afghanistan and we were in a remote environment, a remote off post that no one knew about. And we were with the Aussie Special Forces. Um, and through flight school, you have to memorize your emergency procedures. Any actual emergency that you need to land the helicopter, you have to memorize all of those. And you think throughout your career, that's never going to happen to me, but whatever. So here I am. We just left the airfield. We're going out on a mission, and I have one of the emergency lights pop on, and it was the engine chip light, which I'm okay in my mind. What was that emergency procedure? It was just said land immediately. And if you're familiar, if you have an engine chip light, you have about 30 seconds before your engine overheats and just gives out. And we're in the middle of enemy territory, outside the border of um of our little talk right there. So yeah, had to land immediately. Thankfully, the other pilot that I was with was also a maintenance pilot, so he hopped out real quick. We called in for overhead support, so the Apaches that have all the extra extra munition if anyone were to come in and try to bother us. But oh yeah, I've never been so scared. My heart went. I was like, keep it together, keep it together. Just land. It ended up being fine. It was just a malfunctioning light, so we went back to the
It
airfield.
ended
But
up being fine. I mean,
oh
that's
my
like,
God, yeah, that was, you
you
know,
know, it's so interesting though. I truly cannot even imagine. But, just to, I think, underscore what we've just talked about, when you think about, yes, bringing in someone who's had these experiences may require a bit of a different approach in, training on things that they haven't done, right? Whatever those technical things are, whatever you're going to be asking them to do as Henry Schein or whatever company. But the perspective that an experience like that gives you throughout the rest of your life on what is truly important, right? And what
mhm.
isn't, and what to get worked up about or what not to get worked up about, or, how to not lose your cool in a situation that in context is nowhere near as extreme, right? I mean, of course that's valuable to have. How could it not be? I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, I starting this said I found a home here with Henry Schein. A lot of organizations have done that, but I am fully dedicated because again, service members volunteered, right? We live in a world today where our military is fully voluntary. So they chose to go the non-traditional path, which, when they do decide to leave service and transition out, it makes it that much harder. So
Hmm.
when you have organizations that understand and realize the talent that they can bring in, um, and help these service members start this new, turn this leaf, start this new path in their life, I want to do as much as possible to be a part of that and help someone um, start off that venture on the right foot.
Yeah.
And you talk to any service member, it's the most difficult time probably in their career is the transition from military to civilian service.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm so glad that you had some organizations that, supported you well and you found your home and are helping a lot of other people do the same, helping them through that transition and, you know, um, in doing so, bringing such amazing skills and perspective and talent into the organization. And I think anyone should be thrilled to put in the little bit of extra effort to help in that transition to, have the advantage of all of those things we talked about, the discipline, the respect, the perspective, the ability to handle, such incredible circumstances as the one you just shared with us. There's far more value than there is the little bit of extra effort that comes into, okay, so how do we help them be successful here, right? Like they're
Yeah,
already amazing. Let's figure out how we give them a playbook to help them kind of navigate this different bubble, right?
yeah.
So yeah, I hope that our listeners will I'm sure many of them are. I know that I've interacted with a lot of organizations in the field service world that feel very similarly, that it's such a amazing source of talent to bring into and help them understand, some of these great opportunities that exist with brands that they've probably seen, but
Hmm.
just haven't, made the connection to. So
Yeah.
really cool. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing some of yourself and your story with us, and also giving people um, some advice on, how to support veterans in coming into the corporate world.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
This is fun.
You can find more by visiting the home of the Unscripted podcast at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.